All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us, and we are really grateful to have Michael Ware with us today, who we've found ourselves in the same room at different times over the years, and have been someone who's always been observing the way that you interact and walk with specifically evangelical Christians on how to engage our political realities here in the United States and this nation state systems in ways that are constructive, that amplify the humanity of our political other, talking about civil discourse, help us navigate polarizing issues. And we're going to talk, we wanted to have you in to help us with that and create some space for those of us as part of this community to build some more tools for how to navigate these conflicted, polarized, partisan times as peacemakers. And we don't see peacemaking as a passive withdraw from the hard conversations, but actually a proactive movement toward it. We need tools, though, to help us move through those conversations. So those of you listening in, as and if this gets linked into Facebook, jump in with questions in the comment thread, and we'll interact with those as we can. I want to say one other thing before I introduce Michael more formally. This conversation is coming at the tail end of what we've been calling our Conflicted Allegiance Following Jesus in Election Season campaign. Many of you probably have interacted with that, whether it was through workshops or webinars or some of our teachings or resources. We want to have a conversation now post-election, understanding that as followers of Jesus, we are always called to give our citizenship, give our primary allegiance to the kingdom of God, because we are citizens of that kingdom. And at the same time, to hold seriously our blue passport and to leverage the influence we've been given as citizens of the United States on behalf of those on the underside of power. That this isn't an excuse to be absent from the systems and structures of our society and how it orders itself. We talked about the word polis. It's just the ordering of society. How is society ordered in ways that are reflective of this kingdom of God? And how do we engage that well as U.S. citizens? So this is part of that conversation. Specifically now, post-election, how do we love our political other? Because we're still sitting around the tables with those, hopefully, with whom we may disagree. And we have to be proactive about that in those conversations. So this is going to talk, how do we love our political other on a personal level, and building that kind of rapport and relationship as part of being peacemakers on a systemic level. We're still, like, these votes we cast are for systems change. And so we're holding all this in tension. We understand that many of us feel that probably more than others, depending on the context you're in, the relationships you're in, and even the faith dynamics of your community. So we're going to have that conversation. Michael Ware, he's a faith advisor, been a faith advisor to presidents. His focus has been on adoption, anti-human trafficking. He's a strategist for organizations who are looking to navigate these precarious and polarized waters of partisan politics on huge issues that all of us have opinions about, but how do we talk about them in constructive ways? He's also leads an organization, a consulting team, Public Square Strategies. So, Michael, welcome. Tell us more about who you are and what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's always great to be with you, John, and appreciate the opportunity. I mean, so I'm someone who's spent my adult life navigating these issues. I started working at the White House about a decade ago now, 12 years ago, and was able to experience the way that faith and politics interact at that kind of level. And one of the sort of takeaways I had was I wanted to make sure I wanted to take those experiences and what I learned there and what I saw play out to help Christian leaders and organizations directly in navigating a very rapidly changing cultural, political, religious landscape. And so that's what I've done since then. I've written a couple books, Reclaiming Hope, and then I just co-authored a book called Compassion and Conviction with Justin Gibney and Chris Butler of the AIM campaign. And then earlier this year, I authored a report on Christianity, pluralism, and public life in the United States. How should Christians and non-Christians think about what Christianity has to offer in an increasingly pluralistic context. And so that's some of the work I do. And, it's been really incredible that it's brought me into contact with people like yourself and leaders, all over the country.
Awesome, man. And this is the thing. And it looks like, by the way, we're on Facebook Live now. So those of you listening in, feel free to jump in the comments thread with questions you have for Michael as you go. You just heard, I saw that we were live as you were sharing a bit about yourself. So you heard where Michael is coming from. I want to state again, to reframe this. This is a conversation now post-election, and we're asking questions. How do we move towards and love our political other or political enemy? Is often the language that's used in our polarized, precarious times in this very partisan reality, and not do it in a patronizing way. We love just because we want to get along and agree, but in a genuine way that's rooted in our faith convictions. To be peacemakers in the way of Jesus, it requires we move into the hard conversations, that we navigate conflict well, that we can disagree but still remain in a relationship, but not, again, in a passive, squirmy way. So we're going to talk about all that. And Michael is someone who's suited to do that because he's been in the political space professionally, working in the White House, now as a consultant among Christians, specifically evangelicals, on how to navigate these hard issues. Okay, let's jump in, my friend. Something that you state, a quote of yours is, I believe politics is a forum for loving your neighbors. Politics is a forum for loving your neighbors. In the last few months, we've talked a lot about some of the ways that we're defining politics. We've defined it specifically going to the root word polis, and how do we order society? That politics is simply the ordering of society. As followers of Jesus, we want to order society in light of the kingdom of God. So Jesus wasn't partisan, but Jesus was political. Talk to us about how you define politics, especially in the context of that statement.
Yeah, so politics is just related to how, to the art of governance. So for me, a lot of things can be political, but when I speak about politics, especially in this context, I'm thinking primarily of those activities related directly to, in the American context, self-governance. And, it is, in some ways, right, it's an incredibly obvious thing to say, right? And that's part of the point. What isn't a forum for loving our neighbor? But the reason why I say it is because in some Christian circles, it's often talked about as if politics is this one area that's cordoned off from God. This one area in which love of neighbor does not apply. And so we need to, it is not that politics is sort of the ultimate forum for loving your neighbor. It's an essential one, especially in this context. And so I want Christians in particular, when they're thinking and acting in politics, to not be formed so much by, and not to have their perception shaped so much by some of the antagonistic and conflict-driven and sort of entertainment-focused perspectives that they'll get elsewhere. But I want Christians thinking about, how could I be faithful in this context where I have responsibility, where I have influence as a citizen? And how can I steward that to love my neighbor, which simply means to will their good? And so a good question to ask when you're in political discussions, ask yourself when you're in political discussions or when you're thinking about political issues, is the position I'm taking oriented toward the good of my neighbors? And if not, why not? Those are the questions we should be asking in all of life. I found that for some Christians, those are questions that they ask in their marriage, in their local communities and local social interactions, especially with people that they're intimate with or close with. That's not a question that we're asking enough when it comes to our politics.
Yeah. How then, I resonate with that, because it seems we talk about following Jesus. Well, that comes with an assumption that we're committed to loving God, to loving neighbor, and even loving enemies. We'll talk about in a little bit in Matthew 5. But just loving neighbor feels like a no-brainer. Why is that such a struggle for Christians in the context of politics? What are you seeing as some of the obstacles? Is it we have a different definition of neighbor? is that we just put politics in a different category, so we don't apply that principle in that space? Or what are you observing as the obstacle to taking that seriously?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much here. I had the honor of writing the foreword to my friend Caitlin Scheiss's book, The Liturgy of Politics, and she does a great job of unpacking in that book, building on the work of people like Jamie Smith and some others, of the way in which the rituals and the systems of our politics actually shape who we are as people, and therefore shape how we go to politics, and in language I use, what we seek from politics when we go to it. So if we go to politics thinking that it's a forum primarily for our self-expression, or primarily for seeking a sort of cultural affirmation, then that is what our politics is going to be sort of reflecting back to us. And so that's a principal problem. And another problem is, let me say it this way. When it comes to public issues, American Christianity over the last half century at least has been hollowed out of confidence. Its confidence has been hollowed out that we actually have something to offer that's real. That we actually have something to offer that's not just sort of parochial sort of folklore, but something that actually represents real knowledge and is actually a gift to the public. And because we lack that confidence, what it means is that when we go to the public, when we go to politics, we treat politics as merely sort of the grasping for enough power to impose our parochial perspective, as opposed to going to politics out of a sense of service. In other words, if we don't have confidence that our faith really is good news, and that what we think our faith teaches actually is loving our neighbor, then we won't be able to approach politics in that way. You get the sense, the way many Christians approach politics, it's as if they feel like in order to get what they want, they need to really pull one over on their neighbors. They need to sort of, and that should lead us to deeper questions. If what we want in politics isn't something that we feel confident about, is oriented toward the good of our neighbors, then maybe our wanter, as Dallas Willard would say, maybe our wanter is off calibration. Maybe we need to attend to matters of the heart. And that's increasingly where I'm going and thinking and working when I think about our current political and social landscape.
Have you seen, what are some examples of believing our faith to actually be good news and have that show up in politics, whether it's in our conversations around our tables about it or in the spaces of policymakers on the Hill? I mean, have you seen that embodied? Because I think a lot of us feel like that our primary posture as Christians has been more a pursuit of power so that we can leverage our agendas on our neighbors rather than to consider what does the flourishing of neighbor look like and posture myself as a servant towards those ends. So yeah, I mean, have you seen it done well? What would that look like?
Oh gosh, so I thought you were going to ask me for examples of where it's been done poorly, and I had that list in my mind.
I think we're all good on that one.
I was about to unspool that for you. You know, I think I do think there are examples. I think of I think of the work that was done in this country, especially in the latter part of the 20th century into the 21st, under George W. Bush, around PEPFAR and AIDS relief, and that was an issue that where you were able to build a coalition that included people who were directly affected by AIDS and communities directly affected by AIDS, but where you also saw people come to the table who were not directly affected, who actually were coming out of a moral compulsion.
Mm.
And so I do think that we've seen that there. When I was in the White House, we were able to pull together coalitions on issues ranging from adoption, human trafficking, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
to fatherhood, to criminal justice reform. So I do think there are these opportunities where, you know, the political landscape, for a number of reasons, is somewhat conducive to facilitating sort of other-centered approaches to issues.
Yeah.
It becomes it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. The deeper that our politics and political tools reach into our individual lives,
Mm-hmm.
the greater the individualization of our politics, the more that we're able to feel like our politics is able to present itself as like personally tailored towards us.
Yeah.
That sort of supports all kinds of impulses that are not healthy, are not helpful. I've been speaking a lot about Galatians, and you know, in that letter, Paul is writing to what is essentially like a polarized community. I mean, you read the opening, and you know, Paul had established that community and then left to like go to other places, and he'd been hearing these reports that since he left, false teachers had come in, sin, all kind of parochial motives. He's essentially writing to a polarized community.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, just I think this is very sort of appropriate for your work, John. Like, and I'm sure you hear this kind of, I think so often when we hear about conflict, when we hear about polarized situations, even when we're talking about like our family, like we think the appropriate response is like some kind of power sharing arrangement. Like, how can we just get these conflicting parties to tolerate one another?
Yeah.
And that's like the chief goal. Like, how can we just stop these people from killing each other or hating each other and acting on that hatred? And so, like, you know, you read Galatians and you think like Paul's going to like recommend some kind of like, okay, like you guys get to choose, you know, the worship music, you know, speaking, you know, the worship music on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other half, you know, gets to decide. And he doesn't say anything like that. Instead, he gives them, he admonishes them to do something that is completely contrary to every impulse that polarization and sort of a tribal sort of approach to life instills in us, which is he tells them to bear one another's burdens. In other words, the approach here that is appropriate for Christians is not to find some way to maximize your own self-interest and just tolerate one another so that you can both pursue like your own individual. It's actually seeing that your interests are tied up with those that you disagree with. It's actually seeing that you have a stake in the burdens that other communities and other groups have. And that is a notion that I think has great applicability to our politics today. One of the major sort of roadblocks to seeing a politics that advances justice and affirms human dignity is because we are refusing to bear the burdens of our political of the political other, as you raised as the topic of this talk, and that's a major problem. The last thing I'll say here is on this point is it's not only Christians that can overcome that. I think we've seen plenty of examples of non-Christians overcome this sort of habitual approach to politics that is only conflict driven and is about sort of parochial motives. But Christians have unique resources that are only available to them, that are uniquely situated to help overcome this. And that's why it's so important that Christians don't just blend into the political culture of the time, because we actually have unique resources unique to us that would be a particular gift to the overall society right now.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to get into that. That's so good. Because I agree. I think we've stumbled over some of this comes down to Christian identity. So many of us have found our primary identity as U.S. citizens connected to a partisan politic over and beyond, if we're honest, our identity as children of God connected to a citizenship of the kingdom. Now, probably on a cerebral or academic level, we would all say, no, our primary allegiance is the kingdom. But pragmatically, the way it's fleshing out in culture wars and such, I'd push back on that a bit. And that leads me to the opportunity we have as Christians, as followers of Jesus, some of the tools. I've been reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s sermons, and one of them, titled Loving Your Enemies, he goes to Jesus talking in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount about loving enemy. And I love the way that MLK talks about this, interprets it. He says, Jesus was very intentional not to say like your enemy. He said to love your enemy, because MLK says it's impossible to like everyone. Yeah. And it can be a bit of a fleeting emotional response, where loving is acknowledging the humanity and the dignity inherent in everyone. It's more subversive, it's more costly. And for me, I hear that as, okay, that is a resource, that is a tool we have within our Christian tradition to have the capacity to love even our enemy, let alone our political other. You know, we get all stuck in these trivial partisan politics at times. Well, what does it mean? We don't have to like everyone that thinks differently politically than us, but we certainly have to love them. What does that look like? And how do we have the capacity to care for our neighbor's flourishing, like you're saying, in such a way that we see it tied to our own? And even if it's not tied to our own, we still have to love. I mean, that is our mandate. One more thing I'll say, and then I want to hear you interact with this. Oshita Moore, who's a pastor in Minneapolis, would say that our enemy is anyone on the other side of our empathy, someone just outside of our empathy, which again gets really pragmatic and practical. Who are those people, especially after the election now, who are like, ugh, I would never do that. Oh, how dare you? I'm not trying to dismiss the differences. And we're going to, our last piece will talk about how we can hold convictions generously, but help us interact with that. Yeah. You know, here's some things in our tradition that help us move towards our other or our enemy. How do we employ those?
So if we consider our primary community to be a political community, the temptations and the pull of politics itself, which is at its best, in its proper sort of place, you know, politics is again about the limited but important sort of means of self-governance, which pulls you as a person towards the practical, towards the technocratic, towards what can be implemented. And that is an appropriate place to be pulled in politics. The problem is, if there's nothing counterbalancing that, then you can be overtaken by a confidence in your political ideas that will make it so that you cannot see the people who are under the ideas that you're pursuing.
Yes.
And so Christians do not sort of go to politics. Christians do not value politics because they value political ideas. They value political ideas only to the extent that they're oriented towards people.
Yeah.
So if there is this sort of technocratic, practical pull of politics in the realm of politics, and I do think that having that in mind is important, because without that, politics becomes about everything. And politics becomes sort of the primary place in which we work out all of our desires, all of our hopes, all of our resentments. And that's part of what we're seeing today. And we don't want that.
Yeah.
So that practical side is important, but it needs to be counterbalanced by the sense that that my ideas about politics and policy are only as important as they're serving people. Now, what that means is that because of that bit of distance between sort of an idolatry of our political plans, it means that our political other, and in this case, I'm speaking of those we disagree with politically, who may look exactly as we do, who may come from the same background, the same socioeconomic status, etc. It means that we could treat the political other, those on the other side of political issues, with a regard that doesn't summarize their worth as totally wrapped up in what we take to be their wrong ideas, and which very well may be wrong ideas. Just one final word, which is like, so what does that mean practically? Well, what it means is that if you're going to politics primarily to sort of get your way, and you may think your way is completely sacrificial and will even harm you and help others, but it's still your agenda. Even if you think it's the agenda, it's still your agenda. If you're going to politics and it's all about advancing your agenda, then you will accept ignoring, castigating, undermining, demonizing your political other, and refusing to acknowledge any value that they might be bringing to the public, because acknowledging any value they have might undermine your ability to pursue your goals.
Yes.
The Christian alternative would be to come to the public and say, look, these are my convictions. I think that the best way to approach healthcare or immigration or climate change or whatever is through these prudential, practical policy tools, but for the public good, and out of recognition of the dignity and the legitimate concerns and interests of those who I disagree with politically. My desire is not to squelch their concerns, but actually to help ensure they get the best hearing possible. Because I'm not here for my agenda. I'm here as a part of a political community that wants to get to the best place imaginable, which may include my ideas, but we're only going to know that if we can get a full hearing for everybody involved. Oof. And if everybody feels like they're a part of a shared political community.
Isn't that what I'm hearing you say is we can only determine if our vision for that shared future, if our politic is good, is if all voices are able to be heard such that we can collectively determine this is what flourishing looks like. And that requires the voices tune in. We often say in our training, we have to grow our capacity to listen longer than feels comfortable. When you're listening to someone who has a different political vantage point, it makes our skin squirm, and we have to listen longer. Or as St. Francis would say, we have to seek to understand rather than to be understood. We have to ask those curious questions. We have to be able to hold that tension, have the capacity in ourselves to be able to be exposed to alternative vision for the future, such that we can remain around the table and collectively build that together. I'm watching you all interact on Facebook. Awesome stuff, Melody. Thank you for the comments, Pat. Thanks for the questions. I want to go to, do you have a couple more minutes, Michael?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We had a hiccup getting started, so we started a little late, and we wanted to have 30 minutes with Michael here. This goes to Pat. I think it's more towards your second question here in this thread. It's one thing to say, and I know you have a book coming out called Compassion and Conviction. To have the ability to have compassion and understanding on our political other. But we're not saying to water down our convictions, to enter a room where we're just going to be less of who we are, to somehow appease our other. And then that's kind of a pseudo peace. That's not a genuine peace. We're not working through stuff together. in an asterisk I want to add to that is I think it's easy, especially for those of our neighbors on the underside of power who are being impacted by broken systems in ways that you and I are not with our blue passports. It's easier for them to say, oh yeah, love your political other. The implications aren't that big for you. Like, it's more of an ideological disagreement where my physical neighbors who we love are impacted and their families are being separated because of these broken policies, where they're like, hey, it's different for me to love my political other when it's literally separating me from my children.
Yeah.
Help us with that. Help us have the capacity to be generous and love our political other without like washing this kind of slippery, soft slope to where we just are passively trying to engage everyone without a collective vision for the future.
Yeah. So I just want to ask folks to really think deeply about the assumptions they have about how, how what Howard Thurman called the disinherited, how they respond to these kinds of issues, and how they respond to these dynamics. Here's what I found. I found that it's those who have faced injustice who are actually the most in tune with the importance of respecting the dignity of those they disagree with, because they're the ones who have most deeply felt what it feels like to be treated as if you are nothing, to be treated as if. And so I really, in my experience in politics, it's actually those with power who are the most uncivil. It's actually those with power and who have faced, comparatively, who have the most privilege, who actually have the luxury of treating politics as only this sort of a matter of ideology. Yes. Believe me, folks on the underside of power fully understand that politics is not just a matter of ideas, because they're on the underside of those ideas. I really want to push back against this idea that, if you really cared about these issues, you wouldn't be, willing to hear from the other side because you know that we need to make progress. Think about the folks who are on the underside of power. It's not just happenstance. It's that they're in an environment where if you can't win over and persuade at least a certain percentage of those with power, then the injustice is inevitably going to continue. So it's often the most comfortable who are saying, look, this is an ideological war. No, there can be no surrender, no compromise. Meanwhile, those who are actually suffering are saying, actually, I'd love to sit around a table and figure out how the boot could be lifted off my neck at a centimeter, an inch, right now, as opposed to your ideological utopian plans for cutting off the leg that's oppressing me sometime down the future, when everything lines up perfectly. And so I really, we need to make sure that when we talk about how the dispossessed relate to these issues, that we aren't imposing on the dispossessed a sort of inferior sort of emotional immaturity, because I actually think the reality is actually quite the opposite. When I'm talking with folks who are suffering under injustice, they often have the deepest sort of understanding and appreciation for the fact that politics is about people, and all your ideas don't mean anything if you're not helping people. And so, I just think that's really vitally important right now.
I want to make sure. I just want to put a pin in something. I want to make sure we're all hearing this loud and clear, because I think it's spot on. Is that there is a temptation to make an idol out of our ideology.
Yes.
And when we make idols out of our ideology, it begins to dehumanize our political other, and it begins to allow us to live this disembodied politic that's disconnected from the plight of our neighbors on the underside of power. I would say the antidote to this idol of ideology is proximity. Get close. Get close to those relationships that Michael's talking about. Enter into those on the underside of power who are more generous with their other than we are, who are sitting here talking cerebrally about this and say, whoa, what is this telling me about myself? What is this telling me about how society functions? How am I being shaped and formed into someone who's participating in a pragmatic way towards our shared flourishing, rather than just living in this economy of shared ideas, which just oftentimes turn into debates, which then is disconnected from relationships and changes nothing.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And I do think it's a matter of thinking about our specific location, our location as individuals. So one way I've talked about this playing out, and this is where the theoretical overlaps very practically with just the way our political system is structured. So, this isn't, I'll try and lay this out quickly, but laying out quickly, it's going to miss some nuance, and it won't be a dissertation. But right now, because of the way that congressional districts are drawn, and just the way political representation works, you have many districts in this country that are constructed so that there is a large minority that is generally opposed to the elected official who consistently represents them. But the minority isn't large enough to ever threaten that elected leader's position. And so very practically for this audience, what that means is like, you have districts in places like Alabama and Mississippi, in Georgia, where districts are 35% African American, and 80-90% of that 35% votes for one party, but that party doesn't win. And so you have elected officials, and this happens in the reverse too. So you have elected officials who feel accountable not to their whole districts, but to those people who support them. And so, speaking in the evangelical space, what this means is that if you are the pastor of a large, predominantly white evangelical megachurch, and you live in one of those districts that might be 35% Black, but that side doesn't get, its side isn't represented politically in office, you might have a really easy time. Actually, I can guarantee you have a really easy time reaching that elected official. And the same works on the reverse. Someone like Tim Keller, for instance, if Tim was located in the South, if he was located in even a suburb, if he wanted to, Tim could be on the phone with his member of Congress every week. The member of Congress would be reaching out saying, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? I don't think that's Tim's position in New York City. And similarly, I don't think it's the position of a major Black church leader, like take someone like I'm not sure if it's great to be talking about, I want to raise up specific people's political sort of profiles, but a Black church leader that's represented by a Republican white, that's in a Republican white area, they don't have that access. When if they were in Tim Keller's congressional district, they would have the access. So the point I'm making here is, if you are that Black church leader who has access to political power because of the congressional district you're in, but know that your white evangelical church church down the street does not have that same access to power, what you raise, given your influence, you might have a burden, going back to Galatians, for sharing the political concerns that might not be your top concerns, but that are legitimate, sincere concerns of the politically differently situated church down the street, using your access. And the reverse works. If you are a white evangelical pastor who, because of the influence that you hold, is invited to the White House and is invited to all these different, and you have 5 minutes with the president or 5 minutes with your senator, maybe 2 of those minutes at least should be saying, look, I'm not sure about the policy here. I'm not sure if I completely agree with my brother down the street, the AME pastor down the street, but he did raise something about the dignity of the human person, how it's affected by this policy you're advancing. That I wanted to make sure his concerns were answered. I hold a stake in his principled concerns about your policy, even if I'm not sure if I agree with him on the policy instrument that should be used. I hope that makes sense. We can leverage the influence we have to make sure the burdens of those who are politically differently situated, but with whom we share a community, are heard in the halls of power. That could happen for people of great influence. It could also happen at the everyday citizen level. Are you attentive to the valid, sincere, legitimate concerns of your political other, of the political other you know, that deserve to have a hearing in the public square?
That's a good word. One way we often talk about that in our peacemaking framework is that we are all given the opportunity, those of us with privilege. We define privilege as just simply the ability to walk away. Some of us have the ability to walk away from those broken systems that impact our neighbors.
That's right.
We have to either leverage that influence, that privilege, or lay it down. And we have to discern when are those moments we lay down that privilege on behalf of those in the underside of power. When do we leverage it, like you're saying, in that conversation, with that phone call? How do we even leverage our influence with how we talk about our political other, the words that we use to describe them that aren't dehumanizing, the family members that think differently, and how we can triangulate internally about what that other person's saying? I mean, I think there's lots of really pragmatic ways for us to think about the larger picture you just offered us of what it means to leverage influence based on the access we have. Let me ask this last question, Michael. We're post-election. Some are celebrating, some are mourning, others are, this has not gone seamless. There hasn't been a concession speech, and we aren't just talking about a presidential election here. We're talking about the state of our politics. Where do we go from here? How do we move forward, understanding that this isn't all going to end with this polarization isn't going to end with one election. And yet we still have to organize this polis together in light of the kingdom of God. What's a couple words or tips you would give us for how to go from here?
If we are constantly waiting for the right sort of constellation of events and sort of circumstances to be set up in order that we might be gracious citizens, that will never come. The way these things work are when you don't have power politically, when your side hasn't won, typically there are all kinds of resentments that sort of are a buffer against a more aspirational sort of approach. And when you do win, then all of a sudden it's let's sit down, and because you have the power, and so let's all come together.
Yep.
If Christians need to be the people who do not find their security in political arrangements, so that we can always be open to the possibility of change, of seeing the political other and giving them a chance. I think, and I say this, in the context, I thought the president-elect was exactly right when he said in his victory speech, and it was, he tamped it down. He didn't say, this is the time where, we can all move forward on the same, we could all agree and sort of move forward. He said, let's just give each other a chance. Now, of course, there are Trump supporters who say, oh yeah, now you wanna give each other a chance. That's because you're in power. And there were Democrats and progressives who, for instance, when Dave Chappelle went on Saturday Night Live after Trump won and said, Dave Chappelle said the exact same thing. Dave Chappelle said, I'm willing to give Trump a chance. Let's just see how this goes. And he got killed for it. At some point, we need to say, yes, there's a history here. Yes, there are things that got us here that we could blame each other for. But in the present moment, let's give each other a chance. Let's not count each other out before we're able to act. And that's a moment we're in now. It's the opportunity that's presented to us now. I think we've had the opportunity in the past and have passed on it. And that's something that happened. But now is a new moment. And let's at least give each other a chance, especially because the opportunity is there. I mean, it's one thing if there's not even and I'm not just speaking about, I'm just talking about a new political moment. We have a bit of a reset here, which is what elections are. And if we never give it a shot, it's just never going to happen. So I'm hoping that we'll steward this new moment better than we have previous moments in the past.
That's a good word. Give each other a chance. This is not a compromise of our convictions. It's actually we often say it reflects the very best of our faith when we move towards our other, holding our convictions, but with our hands open enough to move together. Michael, you have something else to say there
let me just say one more thing, which is, so part of what that means is our political and media structures right now are built up to affirm and magnify intended or unintended sort of offenses that might come our way. And so part of what give each other a chance means that we're going to be resistant to this pull that anytime that there's a disagreement, anytime that someone says something that could be construed to be that's the deal breaker, that's where we're cutting things off. Christians in particular, and I'm not talking for naivete, I'm not talking about sort of being easily duped. What I am saying is understanding that there are people who profit off of our being offended and off of our hating our political enemy, no matter who they are. And we want to be really sure that what's being presented to us as a direct antagonism is actually intended as a direct antagonism. And that happens, and that has to be dealt with when it happens. But especially in these early days, it's going to be really important, maybe don't retweet, so speaking of like individuals, maybe don't retweet that thing that just seems, that thing from the other side that, is just so jarring, maybe don't amplify, the worst of the worst, and sully the whole endeavor. We need to have frankly, we just need to have a thicker skin in such a polarized time, because if we don't, if Christians are going to politics looking to be offended, they will find it. Believe
Oh,
me,
yeah.
I've been there.
Yes.
and there are definitely, if that's what you're going to politics for, you'll find it there. I would just suggest that that's not what Christians should be going to politics looking for.
That's good. Michael Ware, his new book, Compassion and Conviction. It's the AND Campaign's Guide to Faithful Civic Engagement. I just dropped a link in our comments thread. His website's michaelware.com. Other ways that people can connect with you that you would suggest from here?
Yeah, so my wife and I, my wife is an international relations expert. We run a Substack at reclaiminghope.substack.com, and it's really a wonderful community of political leaders, Christian leaders, journalists who subscribe, and we provide both curated content, but also exclusive analysis on the intersection of faith, politics, and culture. And so that's reclaiminghope.substack.com, and it's one of my favorite things that we do. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, my friend, it's a gift to be with
great
you.
Talking with you.
I'm super grateful. I speak on behalf of everyone listening in. We need some footholds to help navigate this, and I feel more hopeful as a result. So grateful.
Yeah, thank
you. All right, brother.
Love being with you.
Catch you later. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, we're done streaming.
Great. Hope that worked for you, man.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So good.
Right.
The interaction was awesome. I'm seeing people tag each other because they're saying you got to hear this. So yeah, I'm sorry for the glitchy start, but I'm really grateful. I think this is the direction we want to.